In this podcast episode, Konstantin Kisin and Ammous engage in a heated discussion about the Israel-Palestine conflict. The conversation was sparked by a Twitter exchange where Kisin and Ammous expressed differing views on the situation. Kisin starts off by saying that he entered the podcast with the intention of having a good faith discussion, but he quickly realized that Ammous was more interested in arguing against points he attributed to Kisin rather than engaging with Kisin's actual views. From the outset, the conversation was marked by tension. Ammous accused Kisin of being a Zionist, a label Kisin rejected, stating that he had never identified as such. Kisin emphasized that his views on the conflict were nuanced and not easily categorized. He expressed that he had not publicly discussed the issue extensively and was approaching it from a place of trying to understand the complexities involved. Kisin pointed out that the term Zionist could mean different things to different people, and he was not comfortable with the implications of the label as Ammous defined it. Ammous, who identified as Palestinian, sought to provide a perspective shaped by his experiences growing up under Israeli occupation. He argued that the historical context of the conflict was essential to understanding the current situation. Kisin acknowledged the historical grievances, but maintained that the existence of the State of Israel was a reality that could not be ignored. He argued that simply wishing for a different historical outcome did not provide a practical solution to the current situation. A significant portion of the discussion revolved around the events of October 7th, when Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel, resulting in the deaths of numerous civilians. Kisin condemned the attack as a terrorist act, emphasizing that it was not a legitimate form of resistance. He argued that the deliberate targeting of civilians was fundamentally wrong, regardless of the context. Ammous, on the other hand, attempted to frame the attack as a response to the ongoing oppression of Palestinians, suggesting that it was a form of resistance against Israeli aggression. Kisin countered that the nature of the attack, targeting civilians rather than military installations, distinguished it as an act of terrorism. He expressed that if Hamas had focused on military targets, the international response would have been different, and the narrative surrounding the conflict would have shifted. Kisin maintained that the actions of Hamas on that day were not justifiable and that they had set back the Palestinian cause by reinforcing negative perceptions of their struggle. The conversation also touched on the concept of collateral damage in warfare. Kisin argued that there is a significant difference between the deliberate targeting of civilians and the unintended consequences of military action. He acknowledged that civilian casualties are tragic, but insisted that they should not be equated with acts of terrorism. Ammous, however, contended that the scale of civilian deaths in Gaza as a result of Israeli military actions could not be overlooked. He argued that the ongoing violence and oppression faced by Palestinians warranted a different perspective on the actions of Hamas. Kisin maintained that while he sympathized with the plight of the Palestinian people, it did not excuse the actions of Hamas. He emphasized that the moral calculus in warfare must consider the intentions behind actions taken by both sides. Kisin argued that the Israeli military's actions, while often criticized, were conducted with the intent of neutralizing a threat, whereas Hamas's actions were aimed at instilling fear and causing harm to civilians. As the debate progressed, the topic of identity politics emerged. Ammous accused Kisin of being biased due to his identity, suggesting that his background influenced his views on the conflict. Kisin rejected this notion, asserting that his opinions were based on a careful consideration of facts and historical context, rather than any inherent bias stemming from his identity. He argued that reducing complex geopolitical issues to identity politics undermines the ability to engage in meaningful discourse. Kisin expressed frustration at being labeled as a Zionist NPC, a term used by Ammous to describe individuals who uncritically support Israeli actions. Kisin insisted that he was not defending all Israeli actions, but rather attempting to understand the complexities of the situation. He emphasized that his criticisms of Hamas were not rooted in a desire to absolve Israel of its responsibilities, but rather in a commitment to condemning violence against civilians, regardless of the perpetrator. The discussion also highlighted the role of media narratives in shaping public perceptions of the conflict. Kisin pointed out that sensationalized reporting often obscures the realities on the ground, leading to a skewed understanding of events. He argued that both sides have engaged in propaganda to further their narratives, complicating the ability to have an honest conversation about the conflict. Ammous countered that the media often downplays the suffering of Palestinians while amplifying Israeli narratives. He argued that the portrayal of Palestinians in the media is often one-dimensional, focusing solely on violence without acknowledging the broader context of oppression and resistance. Kisin acknowledged that media bias exists, but maintained that it is essential to critically evaluate the information presented rather than accepting it at face value. As the podcast drew to a close, both Kisin and Ammous acknowledged the complexity of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Kisin reiterated his belief that while he sympathizes with the Palestinian cause, he cannot condone acts of terrorism or violence against civilians. He emphasized the importance of distinguishing between legitimate resistance and acts of terror, arguing that conflating the two only serves to perpetuate the cycle of violence. Ammous, on the other hand, maintained that the historical context of the conflict must be considered when evaluating the actions of both sides. He argued that the ongoing oppression faced by Palestinians cannot be ignored and that it shapes their responses to Israeli actions.